The World Bank has advised Nigeria to rethink its policy on fuel subsidies, arguing the payments help affluent Nigerians more than they do the Nigerians that are in need. World Bank Group President David Malpass also shared his views on Nigeria's multiple exchange rate system, which could make for some uncomfortable listening for some of those, but for others, a call that has been very long coming. The week-long IMF and World Bank Group spring meetings are ongoing with discussions on the Russian invasion in Ukraine, digital payments in Africa, and the prospect for global environmental advancement.
Arise International Correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya joins us now to further share her thoughts on the meeting of the Bretton Woods institutions in Washington. Adefemi, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. Let's begin with how the advice by the World Bank has been received by Nigeria in terms of dropping the fuel subsidy. What reactions have trailed that advice?
All right, so let's take a few steps back. We'll know that the first time the World Bank made this gentle peace offering in terms of advice to Nigeria in recent times was in November, where that was the first time that they kind of made it clear that Nigeria spending so much on its fuel subsidy was kind of not the best thing that they thought that money could be used for. Of course, Nigeria fittingly didn't respond along those lines. And we can see that because when we look at the Senate approving funding towards 4 trillion naira specifically for these fuel subsidies, it underscores how Nigeria received that first bit of advice. So here we are at the spring meetings, and yet again, after the World Bank president was asked a question, actually by a This Day journalist, Obinachima, he asked him what his thoughts were as it pertained to, of course, these subsidies. And what the president said was, in general speaking terms, whether these subsidies are for fuel or for food, he doesn't think that they're the most efficient use of resources. And using the Nigerian example, according to what the World Bank says, there have been examples of a level of wastage that they say could be detrimental. So detrimental that before the end of the year, there could be a situation where state and federal governments would be struggling to pay salaries. That is not going to be something that Nigerians want to hear. They also don't want to hear too much about having to pay more at the pump. So it is finding themselves in a bit of a conundrum. And we know, as Nigerians obviously privy to the everyday life in the country, that many people would feel quite disheartened if the subsidy, the fuel subsidy, was to be taken away. But if we're looking at this from an economic standpoint, and in terms of ways that Nigeria can perhaps plug places in which it's hemorrhaging funds, the World Bank suggests that the first place that they should start, especially when it comes to saving money, would be this fuel subsidy, because it costs so much and because they think that that money is essentially being wasted and would be more useful in other areas. And talking about things being more useful in other areas, there's also a bit of a criticism as it pertains to Nigeria and its multiple exchange rate forces. You heard in the package there the World Bank president saying that he doesn't think that that's also an efficient way to have a country develop, and thinks it's actually become quite a haphazard thing for the Nigerian economy. Now, going back to your initial question there, what have been the reactions, the immediate reactions? We are still waiting to hear them. Inside this building, we know that Zainab Ahmed, the Nigerian Minister for Finance, has arrived. Initially, we knew that the morning meetings around 7 o'clock, of course, it's just gone it's around 8:30 a.m. here now. They are still very much inside the building, and it will be some time before we're starting to see more people trickle out, and hopefully then we'll be able to hear what it is that was discussed inside as it pertains to Nigeria, and we can have a clearer idea of what, if anything, is going to change, because as we already know, the Senate has already approved this vast amount of money specifically for this fuel subsidy. So it'd be interesting if something happening in there would change that on the outside for Nigerians.
Well, Adefemi, it seems the Russia-Ukraine crisis has overshadowed the COVID-19 pandemic, but the issue of vaccination, especially in Africa, which is lagging behind, it's still very topical. What's been said about this at the spring meetings?
Alrighty, so if we're looking at the pandemic, before the onset of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, that was definitely going to be the top agenda, how fast it is that the world is becoming inoculated against COVID-19. Now, here we are in April of 2022, and if we cast our minds back to last year, especially around the G7 period, there was a big push for 70% of the world's economy to be vaccinated against COVID-19 by the end of 2022. So here we are, not so much in the halfway point of the year, but obviously there isn't too much of a difference between what the statistics were last year as it pertains to the developing world and how their populations have been inoculated to what we're seeing now. So that's definitely going to be something that's dominating the conversations. If we're looking at Nigeria, or let's look at Africa, we know that Africans, just 10% of African populations have been vaccinated against COVID-19, and there are many reasons for that. Obviously there could be vaccine apathy, but there's a lack of access to a whole heap of African countries are still waiting out for handouts when it pertains to COVID-19 vaccines. And that's obviously because the bigger manufacturers have not been sharing patents. And while there is, of course, the emergence of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's obviously not coming at a rate fast enough to continue inoculating these populations across Africa and the developing world to help this recovery move that bit faster. So again, Temi Tokwe, it will be interesting to see what lines are coming out of these meetings as it pertains to the vaccination process. But I also want to talk about the pandemic and the fact that it's had obviously such a dastardly effects on the global economy. One of the reasons why the global economy expectations for growth have been revised down, and that's obviously been compounded by the Russian invasion in Ukraine. You heard Kristalina Georgieva in the package there say that they were battling one thing, and that's now been compounded by another. First the pandemic, now this war, and that war has dominated conversation so far, we're believing, inside the International Monetary Fund. Very early this morning, we saw many Ukrainian delegates going into the building, and it was expected, according to the schedule, that there was a high-level ministerial meeting as it pertains to how they can properly address Ukraine's financial needs. So that's why the representatives from Ukraine are here, in order for them to say in their own words what it is they need from the international community as it pertains to financing, because as we know, the economic situation in Ukraine isn't great. The expectations for negative growth are steep. So it's definitely going to be another interesting thing as it pertains to the pandemic having a natural knock-on effect on the global economy, and of course this war, how it's affected Ukraine and how it's affected the rest of the world.
Live from Washington, D.C. at the IMF World Bank Spring Meetings, Adefemi Akinsanya, thank you so much for joining us.